Let's build your Sling Tote step by step. No stress, all style, and totally doable. Keep watching.
Let's look at the assembly of the sling bag. Now we're starting with the end panels, not the side panels, these are the end panels. So you can see where the embroidery is, that's going up and that will attach to our strap. So let's just stitch these panels together. We have one for one end and one for the other. Seam on seam, stitching just inside the perimeter stitching line to give us a generous 1/2 inch seam. We don't want to see the perimeter stitching of the embroidery on the outside when complete. Okay, so there's our seam. We'll do that to the other one as well. And then we have our base panels which we want to join together, and now we have our strap panels. Now there's a sequence. We want the pattern to be continuous, so make sure that you've got green leaves onto flower, and we also have here 3 linings which are the same as the straps. I'm going to cut some lining out here, so we need a pair of end panels, a single base panel, well up the top there, just a single, and we need a pair of side panels, which is the triangular trapeze shape. Use the joined blocks as a pattern and just cut around the edge. So normally this narrow block here you'd think would be the end of the bag. Well, it's not, it's the middle of the bag because the straps are grown on to the side panels which we've just joined. So a pair of centres, a pair of ends, and a single base panel. You can put zips in this, pockets in the lining, whatever you wish to do. Now we're just doing a simple plain lining. So we have a pair of our centres and a pair of our end blocks, or the ends of the bag. So let's join our seams. So we're joining our centre panel onto our end panel. The centre panel's got a little bit of stretch to it because it's slightly off grain. Well, it's on slightly biased grain, not true bias, but slightly biased. So therefore it will be a tad longer. Beware of that. Don't let that run over and trim it off. Just ease it in because it is valid that it is longer. It just will not look like it's sitting flat until it's been pressed, but it is a slightly longer seam. I've checked these seams. They are the right measurement. It's just when you make them, they seem longer. So there's our seam there. Seams can sit one direction or they can be opened up, whichever you desire to do, whatever your fabric you're using demands. That could also be top stitched if you want. It's up to you. So we have 2 of these to join together, and we're going to create a loop. So we're going to join our next panel onto our centre, and then our next panel onto that, so it's a loop. And then we'll be inserting the base into this loop. Now with an eased panel, generally you would have that upside down so as that the fuller end would be against the feed dogs. But I tried that with this and found that I got a better result having the stretchy one on the top. So it's just the nature of the beast with the fabric I chose. But I did try first of actually easing that in on the base. 1, 2. Just using a 2 length on seam, so that's 2mm length on seam, nothing special. So it's 1 notch below what we'd call the normal preset length in our stitch. Make sure you back tack each end of the seams as well. So here we have the body of our sling bag joined together so it's a continuous loop, and that triangular panel is the center side, and the rounds of the ends are the sides. So it's where the handles grow off those side panels. We want to find the center of each of these base panels. So just put seam on seam and give the seam allowance a little nick just for 1/4 inch. Okay, that's what's a good indicator. Okay, so again, seam on seam. So if your long ones with seam on seam, you can measure it if you wish. Up to you. I generally just fold and clip. So same way as measuring, it's up to you. And if you put seam on seam, there's the measurement there. So it's the same method. Seam on seam and clip. You need this to actually create a successful square base. Right. That panel seam on our base matches that, not the long notch. But we're going to put our short ends on first. Again, we want to find our center. It runs in line with our center of that pattern seam as well. So the long panel to the short of the base panel, which has been joined, and we want to sew from corner to corner. Don't sew past it, sew up to it. So we're going to reverse up onto that corner because that's going to be our pivot. We're going to clip and then turn our work, and it will all fit together miraculously because it's all been measured. So here we've actually seamed that panel on from point to point and matching our notch on our other end of our base. And again, we'll seam from point to point. And then clip into those corners. You'll see me just clip to just shy of the stitch. Don't go right to the stitch, just go slightly shy of the stitch. It will blunt your corner slightly, but it's a little bit safer because it's actually a bag base. And it's center notch onto seam. And you'll see that seam all fits together. That was where our notches, and we'll do the same at the other end. Reposition that slightly. Right. So we're going to stitch from point to point. I sometimes start up on the seam that's already been completed, sink my needle, as you'll see me do here now, and then turn the corner. It just makes it a better corner. You can use a zip foot for this if you wish, if you find it's too bulky. I'm just using a patchwork foot, my favourite. And we're sewing just inside the perimeter stitching line on our embroidered panel. That's what the guide is. Turned that corner and just stopped on the side there. There's a nice sharp base. Oh, a bit of a wiggly seam. I go over my seam sometimes. With a domestic machine, it's very, very hard to keep sometimes your seams straight because you don't have much foot pressure and your work pulls out from underneath the foot. push those corners out. That's why I love steam. Steam pushes this corner. So the side seams don't actually have a panel on them. The side of the bag is actually curved. The panels happen in the centre of the bag. So going to your iron, putting some steam in and pushing those corners out, that will be a sharper, more successful look. So a different shape for us, but it truly is a sling bag. Let's make up our lining. It's the same principle. We're going to join all our panels, create a loop, and then we will put the base into it, but we'll leave a hole in the base, of course. So, okay, so there's our centre panel, and then we're going to join it onto our next. I take ever such a slightly bigger seam when I'm making my linings up. So like if it's rather than a 1/2 inch seam, I'll sew a 5/8 seam or 1.5, just so as my lining feels a little bit tighter inside the bag than it would do if I'd used the plain seam allowance. It stands to reason that the seam will need to be slightly bigger and the line needs to be slightly smaller to be sitting inside the bag successfully. So I generally do a 5/8 seam. If the base is slightly gathered on, I don't really worry too much. Right, so we have our joined loop of panels. I'm going to find all our centres, seams on seams to find our centres, and then we have our base panel, which I'm just going to stay stitch around the outside edge of that, just so as I know what my seam allowance is going to be to sew it together. A little bit of stay stitching is good. We're also going to be putting a little gap in one of the bottom seams so as we can pull the project through when it's complete. And by doing that, we need to actually have some stay stitching, which will help us stitch that seam closed on the lining once the project has been pulled through, pressed and completed. I used to always think it was stay stretching, but as long as you don't pull your work, you're not stretching your lining, you actually are, you're truly staying it. So there we are, 1/2 and 1/2 lining nicks, and again, seams on seams, and we'll put those double nicks in together. Now we know what our side nicks and our centre nicks are, we can join our lining. First of all, I want to make an opening of about, let's say about 6 inches, so 3 either side of the notch, and that will be our guide to leave the hole in the bottom lining seam to pull our work through. Again, like what we did with the outside shell of the tote, we're starting with our ends of our base panel onto our side panel, and we're stitching from point to point. And we'll do the other end as well. This bag looks more elaborate than it really is. It's actually quite simple. The only degree of difficulty will be attaching our strap onto our bag. And when I say a degree of difficulty, it's not difficult, it's just a different method. So I'm going to leave my hole open here. So the side seams panel seems to be exactly where we need it to be. It's seam on seam for my notch. So notch there on the centre seam to the centre of the base panel. Then we're going to sew from that mark out to our corner, because we want to leave an opening to bring our project through once we've completed it. So one seam will have a hole in it and the other seam will be complete. and our base will then be fitted into our work. See how I'm pulling out there under at the end? I'm pulling that under, making it sort of like a folded triangle. That helps you not catch everything when you actually sew. Let's go to our next size, and we're going to clip into our stitch and turn our work. So we're looking at notch on notch. See how that forms a triangle? That crease is a triangle of when you're about to sew. And all the seams completed point to point except for the opening. So that shell should represent the outside shell. So I refer to in a bag, we look at an inside shell lining and an outside shell embroidery. So we're going to be marrying the shells together. That's what our next step is, but opening our seams up. But what we want to do beforehand, because it's a curved seam at the top of the bag, I've placed 1.5 inch width of interfacing, of iron-on interfacing, just around the curve, and I didn't have very much of it, so I just cut a strip, and I then cut into it so as it sits around the curve. The pictures and the notes are probably a little clearer, but the little just V notches, so as that it can sit around the curve. And what that does is it helps the lining sit inside the project and not want to sort of spill over. Don't forget, we need to actually pop our flap closure. I actually ended up shortening this by 1 seam allowance, by 1/2 inch. I ended up shortening it slightly, and don't forget to put the other side of the magnetic closure on. Same distance down. I think it was 1.25 inches, maybe 1.5 inches. I think it was 1.25 inches from the seam. Don't forget to put those on. Right. Next stage before we do our marrying together, we need to make our strap. So you can see that I don't want that. I don't want flower to flower. I want it to look like it's continuous. So very simple. We're just going to sew as the seams are tops of seams, and we're just sewing inside the stitching line. We're going to do that on both those panels. So we've got 3s. We did the same with our lining. And then we're going to sew down the long edges of our strap. But I want you to leave a couple of inches open at the end. I don't want you to sew all the way through. They need to be even, but just don't sew them. So we're going to be starting and stopping in from the edge or the end of the strap by a couple of inches, 5 centimeters. Seam on seam. So both sides, and we want to leave that open for a couple of inches at the end. 1.5 inches, 2 inches, whatever, just leave it open. Because we want to sew that, we need to sew that onto the seam, but we also need to sew the lining on, so we need to be able to have a little bit of wriggle room to turn out. I've just put a 4 thread through my turner. I'm going to feed it down the tube of this and push my strap through. It's a bit difficult. I won't say it's not, but totally doable. You might all have better ideas of how to do this. I just worked it very, very slowly. Just pinched it up, pushed it down, held on to the tool on the inside, and then finally, actually I pulled so hard I actually pulled some of the seam allowance off. There's so many uses for this strap though. And once it's pressed, it looks nice and straight. But there's so many uses for it. I mean, I can imagine a belt or all sorts of things. I can imagine a guitar strap actually, but it's it's a great. See where I pulled the seam allowance off? I'll just put something over top of that, sew it on, and it'll be fine, nice and safe. So we want to sew. And see that there needs to be left enough opening so as you can open that seam out so you can sew it. So that's going to have a seam across there. It's going to look like it's just organically appearing from the side of the bag. That's the whole idea about a sling bag. It just looks like it's one piece. So let's attach this first. Let's attach our straps. When attaching one side, great. Just make sure you haven't got a twist in it. Because having a twist in it now and then turning it through to the right side, especially when everything's finished and clipped and stitched, will not make for a happy life. So we want to sew across there, and I'm very careful making sure that it is sitting right. Yes. And we're going to attach the other side as well. Right. So I've only sewn just past the perimeter stitching line around the curve of the top of the tote. Don't want to sew all the way out if I possibly can help it. So I'm just starting in at the corner indicator, which you'll see with stitching there, and we're going to make sure that our seams are sitting on top of seams and our start and stop seams are sitting on top of each other as well. It's very important that it's nice and well positioned. Yeah. Sometimes I start one side and think to myself, oh, it doesn't feel very comfortable, let's turn the work over. And it does appear to be much easier to do if you turn the work over. Nothing is wrong when it comes to the stitching. Nothing is wrong. Do whatever feels right. So now, leave those open. Leave those are the linings, and they're going to join onto the brick red lining. Put that inside your pressed lining. Okay, there's the hole at the bottom. And we want to sew lining to lining. With the same width seam allowance that you sewed strap to bag. Check that if you're not sure, because it needs to be the same length, otherwise it will not sew together well when you do the final stitching around the top of the tote. It might only just be like millimeters, but it will make a difference. Just make sure that seam is the same width. Right. Try and get in there and give it a little press if you possibly can. It's very difficult. So now we put the two top edges together, and I've pulled the strap through a little bit. I've pulled it out from, so here we are, we're pulling that through. Turn that strap on the side out and pull that out a little bit, and you'll find you'll be able to do a continuous row of stitching along the strap and then along the curved edge of the tote bag at the top. We can see where we're finished, so we need to pin seam on seam there. So we start and stop on our strap seam. Just clipping that seam together. Okay, so it's starting and stopping on the strap seam. It feels awkward, but it is a really lovely finish. So sewing around the curve, stitching on the inside perimeter line ever so slightly. Make sure you've got seam on seam. Just remember that one of those seams in the centre of that curve will have the flap closure, so it'll feel a little bit thicker, maybe a little bit of resistance of the foot going over it. Just be gentle. And so we're coming around our curve here again. And running up across the strap seam onto the strap so as it's continuous. So we've done one. Once you're happy with one, clip and do pin and do the other side. So here we have our seam. Stitching's a bit wonky, but it's okay. Trim back to half the value, so it's actually sort of 1/4 of an inch, 5 or 6 mils. Trim all the way around the curve up onto the strap. I think I finished at the strap seam. And then just clip every centimetre in around the curve only. You don't have to do the whole thing. Just around from the panel seam up into the strap seam. And I'm not going right to the stitching, I'm just cutting half the value, but it would be enough to release when you turn through. If you find your stitching is really, really wiggly, then you need to redo it. Or fix it up, or straighten it, or recurve it before you do the step of turning it through. Turn it through. Hopefully you shouldn't have the strap caught on anything. Well, we haven't. Yay. Give that edge a nice firm press. Those seams that are attaching the strap should be open and sitting flat. We want to close this lining seam off. And there we have our bag ready to do our final stages of stitching around the actual edge, stitching around that top edge and finishing our lining. But a great project, something different from us now, and hopefully we'll do some more of these because I think the floral straps are brilliant. Just quickly showing you, I'm just edge stitching. So I've got probably a clear thread or a dark thread on top and a matching ready thread on the bottom. I'm just stitching on the very edge, hence edge stitching, and then I'll come up to my strap seam. Stitch in the ditch along the strap seam. Just holding up the back of the foot with a needle case to help it actually move properly. That was the end of that seam. I'd already started around the edge there. And we're going to just quickly sew that closed. You can glue that, or you can hand sew it, or you can machine sew it. I always machine sew it. No one sees it. Sitting right at the base of your bag. Then the bag just needs a jolly good steam and press. And it is done. There we have it, our sling bag.